China's economy has been on the brink for years. It was marveled as the strongest growing economy in the world for decades, but once the curtains were pulled back and the truth revealed, suddenly everything seemed so obvious. China's economic success was never real. It was entirely predicated on ghost cities, highways into the desert with no destination, and stolen intellectual property combined with protectionism to give those rip-offs a chance to succeed. And this mirage started to crumble 4 years ago, first with the onset of COVID, then with the property market meltdown, and then geopolitical strife that has marred the country's previously envied manufacturing sector. And all of this has taken a major toll on China, but not only on its standing around the world, but also on the growth of its own markets and economy, the performance of its investors, and the wealth of its citizens. Most recently, though, China has announced a supposed plan to reignite the fire within its engines, to finally claw it back to its ever-desired glory. The only problem with all of this is it's all based on lies. Xi Jinping recently started a tour of factories across the Hunan province with as much media attention and press coverage as he could possibly achieve. It was an attempt to shine a light on this industry within China, which most people think dominates their economy, but in reality never has. Investors claim this tour, which was no small event by any means, was an attempt to drive the country down a new path, away from construction projects for their own sake and away from useless investment into infrastructure that never gets used, and instead into manufacturing and exports. In particular, Xi was continuously making specific note of two separate things: Deng Xiaoping, the previous premier of China, and an old communist phrase, new quality productive forces. Now, Deng brought China into the forefront of the global economy, focusing on their massive cheap labor force and their ability to manufacture and export products all around the world. But this is where China's initial growth actually came from. But in the 2000s, things started to change, and China was essentially overtaken by vanity. The Belt and Road Initiative is the perfect example of this. China assembled the largest network of high-speed rail lines in the world. They were building thousands of miles of highways across the country for years on years on years, all with the supposed idea that it would stimulate economic growth. But these high-speed rail lines never really got used, and neither did the highways or the bridges or the vast majority of these massive construction projects. China even resorted to building thousands of skyscrapers with no one to live in them, resulting in the infamous ghost cities scattering the deserts. And whilst these projects technically increased the GDP of the country, after they did cost money to build, they didn't actually increase the productivity of China. They were one-time boosts to the economy, and after they were built, they stopped providing utility as the jobs for those who were building them disappeared, and there was no value to the projects themselves. And this is ultimately why we now have witnessed 4 consecutive years of economic decline in China, because this amounted to a massive bubble that has been deflating ever since COVID hit us. And finally, it seems China has recognized that this was all false wealth, and they're trying to steer clear of it. New quality productive forces is essentially the newest communist buzzword for economic growth that stems from real value and not inflated numbers on a screen and millions of tons of concrete poured into the desert for no reason. They want to return to manufacturing as the basis of the Chinese economy, which is actually not an awful idea, and so this phrase has been plastered all over the country. It appeared 9 separate times in an essay published in a Chinese state-run media outlet a couple of weeks ago, and Xi has been pushing it himself as well. Deng Xiaoping, the previous premier of China, was the architect behind the original phrase and the economic growth that it created, and so Xi is trying to tie himself to that past success and use it as a springboard to finally create some lasting economic growth for the country himself. Now, before we get on with why this plan is doomed to fail, I'm running a live workshop on Thursday teaching people how to build an online income from YouTubers just like me without ever having to make a single video yourself or ever show your face. It's 100% free to sign up, but spaces are severely limited, so make sure to be quick. Now, this plan doesn't mean all is well for China, and it doesn't mean the future isn't going to be fraught with problems either. Firstly, China is still going to witness a decline in economic productivity over the coming few years because this bubble isn't finished deflating yet, and there is simply no way around that. But more importantly, China is likely to encounter a few new problems with this change of direction, ones which they cannot outrun and that are verifiably real. The first one is known as the middle-income country trap and is well documented around the world. It predominantly impacts developing countries who used to be poor or maybe even still are, but are at least growing. The problem lies in the fact that their growth is driven by globalization and their cheap costs of labor. Think of a poor country where $2 an hour is a good wage, so it sees an influx of foreign capital to manufacture products and then export them back to wealthier countries for greater profit for corporations. But as more and more foreign investment dives into the country, as their labor forces get better skilled, better educated, and as their demands for worker safety and quality of life improves, their efficiency and cheapness on the global scale starts to decrease. And so soon enough, foreign direct investment reduces and it moves over to other countries that haven't seen these costs rise yet, which currently appears to be in Africa. And that developing country had evolved into a middle-income country, but now it's trapped. It isn't rich enough to compete on a services basis with places like the United States, and it isn't cheap enough to compete with undeveloped countries that are still dirt cheap to build in. So essentially, we see middle-income countries race as fast as they can to get as much wealth and investment from manufacturing as they can before transitioning into more valuable industries like services and research. Some countries like South Korea and Taiwan manage to do this very well, but others like Malaysia have not been able to bridge that gap yet, and their growth is stalling as a result. China had already been at risk of this happening to them, but they at least had a massive technology and research industry, only really beaten out by the US, which was supposed to be the driving force to bringing China out of poverty. But this phrase that the Chinese state has been beating like a drum, new productive quality forces, directly ignores innovation, technology and services, all in the service of manufacturing. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but China is not a wealthy country. Its economy is only impressive by nature of its size due to the sheer number of people in China. Its GDP per capita is only $12,000. It's poorer than Argentina, poorer than Costa Rica, and even Bulgaria. Taiwan and South Korea, two countries that did escape the middle income trap, on the other hand, their GDP per capita is 300% greater than China's, and America is 7 times richer. So China is absolutely still at risk of getting stuck in the middle income trap. But even if China weren't at risk of that at all, they still have problems coming their way regarding this new strategy. The chip war is well documented, and it's now common knowledge that the best and most advanced microchips in the world are not allowed to be exported to China anymore, and they're not allowed to be sold to Chinese companies either. This alone will seriously damage China's ability to keep up with the rest of the world, as their technology will literally be 5 to 10 years behind the rest of the world on a good day, but China's geopolitical spat with the West is causing them to shoot themselves in the foot even further and make this problem even worse for themselves. Recently, the Chinese government officially banned any government entities from using Microsoft software, Intel or AMD chips in their hardware. This will further that issue for China on its own, but the reason they're doing this is to supposedly encourage domestic development and manufacturing of high-level chips, so it's incredibly likely we slowly see these new rules extended past the Chinese state and onto Chinese companies in the public sector as well. Finally, China's whole plan relies on its ability to drive more foreign investment into manufacturing and to expand their productive base to export more goods to the rest of the world. But geopolitical tensions are going to make that incredibly difficult. Apple went from manufacturing every single iPhone they've ever created in China to uprooting their entire supply chain and moving the most recent release to Taiwan instead. Companies all over the world have witnessed the trade war Trump enacted on China. They've heard China's intent to invade Taiwan, and they've been watching every time the US reaffirms their commitment to Taiwan's independence. And then they've now watched the largest land war in Europe since the Second World War waged for more than 2 years in Ukraine, with full backing from every single NATO country and many more too. For a company to willingly choose to manufacture their products in China requires them to ignore reality and to take a massive risk that someone here is bluffing and that tensions will cool, not get worse. It is going to get incredibly difficult for China to attract manufacturing back within its borders, and this is simply going to make its plan incredibly difficult to pull off. The country is quite frankly moving backwards. It is shunning the most valuable industries in the world, trying to adopt communist ideology to drive growth. It's a bold and brave plan, but it just doesn't seem feasible in any way, shape or form. Now, this won't be an instant collapse by any means, and it will be the end of China as a major player on the world stage. As the USSR proved to us all, you simply cannot be a superpower without an economy to back it up. China doesn't have that economy today, its population is shrinking, and it's only going to get worse from here on out. Now, if you watch a lot of YouTube videos like this one right here, and you've been looking for a new way to make money online, go down onto the description and check out the live workshop I'm running on Thursday, where I teach you how to build an online income and make money off of YouTubers just like me, just like what I do, without ever having to make a single video or show your face. It's 100% free, but there are severely limited places, so do be quick.